Also, under new business, several of the board members attended the the South Carolina School Board Association's Legislative Advocacy Conference in early December. And I had just asked each one, if you want to, mention one little takeaway or tidbit from the conference. It's always an extremely informative conference, and it kind of gives us a pulse on what to expect out of the General Assembly, as well as Congress on, and also just administrative rulings in the coming year that will impact education and things related to our schools. So Ms. Henson, I'll start with you if you have anything.
Sure. So it would be really hard to kind of narrow it down to one big takeaway, but as a new school board member, it was really great for me to sit and put names with faces for the different legislators and what their roles are. And so I was writing down lists of people and what they do. And so big learning curve here, but it was nice to see who does what. And it was a very informative conference.
Mr. Anderson?
I always get excited anytime I hear Rita Allison talk about education, because we've never had a bigger cheerleader or a champion for education of our children and K-12 education in this state. And of course, she was no exception at this one. But also, you might have to help me with the guy's name that does all of the finance stuff for the state.
Mike Shealy, he's the Senate Finance.
Mike Shealy, yes. And, you know, finance is, no offense, Mr. Salters, but it can be painfully numbing, you know, at times, if that's not your strong suit or your forte. But he always makes that so interesting that, you know, I mean, you're really glued to every word that he's saying. So, and I've taken his slides and gone back through them since then. So this was sadly, it was a virtual conference and not like it normally is, and I did miss that fact, and you know that we didn't get to have the one-on-one with our peers and our colleagues from other districts across the state. But all in all, I think that it was a very worthwhile attendance.
I think Dr. Powers, you also attended virtually.
Yeah, it's interesting because you hear about the $1 billion windfall over this past year, but it's not in recurring revenue. So I guess that's like capital gains and other things. I'm still trying to understand how state revenue ebbs and flows, but there's only 100 or 150 million in recurring sources of revenue. So obviously that informs their ability to do step increases. So just hearing what's going through the legislature's mind, because I mean, obviously the federal government does what it does with funding for our district, but the state budget really drives it. And then only a lever is, you know, raising essentially millage. So it helps us understand what the future holds. So I enjoyed it.
Well, I also was going to mention from it's always very informative. It's heavy on the school financing, but one item that just stuck in my head, and I've actually mentioned this to a number of people, came out of Mr. Shealy's presentation, and he was talking. He had attended back in October the South Carolina's Board of Economic Advisors. I think they had a virtual conference, and they had a presentation by a Laura Ulrich, PhD, and she is a regional economist in the research department of the Federal Reserve in Richmond. And he mentioned something from her presentation, and I actually circled it and put a big star next to it because I just think this is fascinating. A lot of the research that they are seeing and reports that they're receiving is indicating that there are large employers through the pandemic, large employers on the West Coast, particularly California, as their employees went to working fully virtually. They realized that their employees were extremely productive working virtually. And what they have started doing is encouraging those employees to leave California and move to the East Coast because they can reduce their salaries because the cost of living here is so much less than California. And they're seeing an influx of these virtual workers coming specifically to South Carolina. And I just thought that was very relevant for us as we start, like Dr. Guyton, your anecdote from earlier about seeing families that are moving here from other places that are remote, seem to be remote from South Carolina. And I think that we're just, you know, we see a lot of growth. I mean, every time I drive down 378, the car in front of me has an out-of-state license plate. And, you know, I'm wondering why they're coming here. But, you know, South Carolina is a great place to live, and we have a great quality of life with, you know, pretty low cost of living, and we have amazing schools. But I thought that that was a really interesting little factoid that he shared with us that really, I think, was very relevant to our school district.